So I wanted to move over to one of the data files that we will be providing you after the session, and everything we talk about today, pretty much, I believe. I'll let you know if there's anything there's not coming over, but everything we show you will be getting, and you can play with yourself. This is a data request, and I'm going to now switch over to Word so that we can take a look at that. So the data request then, based on which reports you picked, which objectives you want to meet, which data elements then do you need as the building blocks of the case that you're making, you then need to kind of present that over to management in a way that just makes it easy for them and helpful in just, I guess, even for our perspective, in documenting what you want. A lot of times, by getting to this point of knowing what data fields do I need from a particular data table can be, something that's, very helpful to just then be able to kind of automate that from there. So at the highest levels, I've given you an example of three different tables that you might want to get from accounts payable, and I did my best to put the data fields that I normally am asking for, and the header file. Header file is mainly, and I apologize, I wanted to kind of go through this and try to help you understand the different data tables that you might get, but then also into the data fields themselves as to why we're getting some of them for analysis. So the high level, invoice header is essentially every record is an invoice. So that's stated there. Invoice distribution, we then get the general ledger distribution of that one record. So one record up here becomes 5 records down here. So as we distribute part of the bill to cost of goods sold and part of the bill to SG&A, etc. So that's kind of the invoice distribution. Then there's the vendor master file, and I didn't put the employee master file, did I? But then we have the vendor master file. A lot of times we ask for the employee master file as well. It's pretty much the same thing as the vendor master file, except a couple of items over here get dropped. So now drilling in a little bit further, I wanted to talk through why we get certain fields and ask certain questions. And one of them being the first thing I can jump to is getting the internal transaction number, knowing that that is like the unique number for a table, and it just helps you. I have to say, I'll just kind of put it in red here just for our purposes right now, but Microsoft Access does a funny thing in that it will add a record number to any data table that doesn't have a record number, or it at least tells you, it warns you, you better do this. And it's for good reason, even though you don't have to ask for a record number from the company. I mean, I guess it's not a bad idea, but normally you can just quickly calculate this in ACL, and we can show you how to do that later. But I do like to put that in there and note that that unique number, knowing that that's the record, but also from a client's perspective, what they think is unique in that data table is also helpful. Because a lot of times I get an invoice distribution file, the internal transaction number is repeated many times, there's postings throughout the general ledger, but yet in, invoice, I apologize, I get an invoice header file that looks like an invoice distribution file. So the invoice header file has multiple internal transaction numbers. It has multiple general ledger account descriptions, etc. And it really doesn't fit to this record type. So by knowing what the client thinks is unique can help you in understanding whether or not you got the right file. And this is this kind of goes throughout throughout the 3 different tables that we'll talk through here. Other data fields that you want to get are fields that help you understand what type of transaction it is and where it might be posted, or who it might relate to. So vendor number, invoice date are useful. I think in the invoice date category, you really should think about the time frame that you're looking for. I wouldn't ask for 12 years of data because the system has it. If it's easier for them to pull the data table that way for you, sometimes it is easier for them just to do a copy of the file and give it to you. So, in that fashion, okay. But normally, I think it's a lot easier for them to give you 2 years worth of data or 3 years worth of data, and therefore, think about that from an invoice date perspective, a check date, an enter date. We ask for a fair number of dates. I'd also say, to think about, I guess, I'm thinking about invoice transactions, what are related tables, and, sometimes the check information comes as a related table, doesn't come with the invoice header table, but it is related and does help you understand, how that invoice transaction's been processed and finished off. And or sort of void dates or cancel dates. I've seen many times where we've run analysis and determined that there were many dummy type transactions or false transactions in the data, and just knowing where those canceled flags are, I like to throw the void canceled flag date in there or flag every time just for that purpose. We've asked some questions here as well, trying to move through this efficiently here. But we basically said some of the things that I've talked about a second ago. As we look at the invoice distribution table, we would not only have the internal transaction number, but this is normally within the invoice distribution table. You may want to have a line number that's being processed against. So in this case, you don't exactly need it, but it is something that it does help you get down to that unique value in that transaction. From the vendor master file point of view, we like to get address, and I mean, getting things like tax identification number and other information, I mean, it can be a little concerning, so you have to take that with some caution. But I do think getting type fields for vendors is very interesting if they're completed. A lot of times these types of fields are not completed, but rather just something that is in the system and no one ever filled it out, so it just didn't go anywhere. As to the data delivery and type, I like to even explain to people what I'd like to get, and I have to say Access is usually the second to flat, but even Excel now has become so popular with its million records that it's something that isn't that much of an issue. And ACL 9.2 better supports that. I will not be using ACL 9.2 today. It is on another computer, but at the same time, the newer versions do kind of allow you to import Excel spreadsheets more directly or export to it as well. Delimited files are kind of next on the list. Sometimes I like to play with them in Excel, but delimited files can also, is a good alternative. This would be a text type file, and if I have one open, it would look something like this, but actually would be a little bit cleaner. And if I can get this one open here, it would look more like this. And this is delimited, where you have, you can kind of barely see it, but these little arrow marks there are tabs, and that's actually the tab character in this program. And it's kind of interesting too, as you can actually, in these text editors, we'll talk about this later, but you can actually try to find a tab, which I've done here. So it's kind of a useful tool sometimes if you're trying to find things. So printer spool files, actually I did just show you that. That looks like something like this. And I don't, particularly like these. I mean, if it's something that you can get, sure enough. But generally speaking, I'd rather you not use that data. It's useful a lot of times to ask for the data structure. I mean, if you are getting a fixed length file, there will be a fixed length, 7, 30, 20, whatever it be. So it's useful to get. For data verification, we've asked for a few things here like record count and total invoice amount value, and whether or not we can get a sample copy of an invoice, maybe for hard copy nature, kind of bringing into play everything that I talked about in the data import mistakes, at least the first like 3 or 4 of them. So that's sort of helpful, I think, just to kind of put that up front. A lot of times these questions get forgotten until the end, and then people don't have time to focus on them at that point. One of the things that I like to do whenever we get a data file is also to validate that data file. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this, and we will actually later show you how to create a small data script that you might be able to use for automating the validation. And I try to automate all of this stuff as much as I can so that you don't have to spend a lot of time doing it yourself. So in looking at the different validation techniques that you might want to consider, I like to ask a bunch of questions. Do we have all the data fields, the supplier records, the invoice records? Is there one invoice record per the invoice file, going back to that unique nature? I would also say on the vendor file with the one supplier record, one thing that happens a lot in the data tables between the supplier and invoice records is that there's a site code, and the site code, it's very common in Oracle, would be used to denote different sites for the same company. So a very large company might have 20 different sites that are being paid to, and you need to kind of get the site code version of the supplier number in order for it to be unique in that table. So and it's more accurate, of where the actual payment was sent. So it's something to think about with supplier records as well, that it needs to be a unique number, the supplier record, and a lot of times you need to kind of consider if there's a site code associated with it as well. So we've talked about some of these in the slides. Do the values and volumes make sense? One thing that you might want to check is in matching things like the supplier file to the invoice file, is it a pretty comparable listing? Do we have enough information matching between the two? If you had a check file, you'd be asking the same questions. Did we get enough payment? And we have that down below there. Do we have the associated payment information? So that's joining in as well. Understanding transaction types, again, going to summarizing on transaction types. I like to look at what are those different types and make sure that we've gotten all of them for processing purposes. And some other things is, sometimes when you bring in data from Excel, you'll get scientific notation in a lot of the text fields, like invoice number. It's kind of odd that that would happen, but it does happen from time to time, and there are ways to kind of fix for that. Probably should note it here because it won't come up later, is to quickly fix for that. Usually in Excel, you can set up a left function where you're taking out, say, the left 20 characters of that particular field. Might even want to do 15, and then the next 20, and then the following 20, and you can use a left function followed by 2 mid functions if you know how to use those, and that would is probably the best way of getting rid of that issue if you've ever noticed that issue. It is common.